Good evening. I'm Adrienne Arsenault in Poland near the Ukraine border. Tonight, a nuclear power plant there on fire and under attack. On the day Ukraine and Russia agree to make it easier for civilians to flee the war.
On the 6th day, I think, we decided that it's time to move.
Stories tonight from so many people on the move. But why are some crossing into Ukraine? Your family here doesn't know you're going? Plus, the former Canadian soldiers already there to fight.
I want to help them. It's as simple as that.
I'm Hanomansing. Also tonight, Canada opens its doors to Ukrainians.
There is no limit to the number of applications that we are going to be willing to accept.
And the signs were clear all across Canada.
We used to burn $60 a day, now we're doing $120.
Sky-high gas prices today, could be even higher tomorrow. This is The National.
This is Poland. We're a few kilometers from the border with Ukraine. This is where safety starts for those fleeing war. And there's a mountain of donated clothing, toiletries, hot food that comes in all night long. And today, a hint of more help. Russia and Ukraine agreeing to a humanitarian corridor to get more supplies in, more civilians out. It is not peace, but if it happens, it will save a lot of lives. But easing the path for more refugees, more than 1 million so far, hundreds of thousands already here in Poland, does not stop the fighting that is driving them away. Fresh horrors are piercing through the fog of war as Ukrainian forces struggle against Russian firepower unleashed on cities. So tonight, one of those cities in Ukraine's south is home to the largest power plant in Europe. It delivers a quarter of the country's electricity. It has been reportedly attacked by Russian forces, and it's hard to make out, but earlier tonight we saw signs of fighting. It is now on fire. Firefighters say they cannot respond because they risk getting shot. Ukraine's foreign minister warns if it blows, it could be 10 times worse than Chernobyl. This is a sign of just how incredibly dangerous it is in Ukraine right now. And as people flee the fighting, they are converging on transit points in other areas of Ukraine. From where I am, let's head across the border into the Ukrainian city of Lviv, where today Susan Ormiston saw the scramble to get to safety firsthand.
None of the crucial details about that tentative humanitarian corridor are known yet, like when it will open and where it will be. Many Ukrainians, though, aren't waiting. They're leaving, a mass exodus. And Lviv is one of the busiest routes to get out. No end to the exodus. The train station in Lviv bursting with war-weary people fleeing their homes, places already torn up or under increasing threats, like Alina Havrik.
We spent there for like 5 days in Kharkiv during explosions, and all of this stuff. And on the 6th day, I think, we decided that it's time to move.
As Russia bears down and Ukrainians defend, terrified residents are rushing the borders. It's very painful. Half our city is bombed and destroyed, she says. After a week of hiding in her basement, she's taking with her her dog, her daughter, and 2 budgies. The train arrives Lviv nearly empty, but the crowding on the platform a few days ago nearly caused a riot. So police helped the most vulnerable and those at risk from the journey.
There are always more people than there are trains. This is one of the busiest days yet. As the shelling intensifies on cities in other parts of Ukraine, people are reluctantly giving up and getting out.
Mostly women and children, men of fighting age, aren't allowed to leave. This man hoped to get his son out. His wife's in hospital, but he's turned back. For those who do go on, a shared worry. When will they get back? A generation of Ukrainians migrating for now.
There is no choice.
Natalia Trestov is aiming for Canada.
We are trying to go to Canada to our relatives because they are waiting for us there.
She, her son Max, and her mother left a village near Kiev after 5 explosions in one morning.
Was it difficult to make the decision to leave?
It was very difficult to make a decision because I have my husband here. So I know that we're gonna have a good future, but I have to be strong.
For Natalie's family, there's no choice. In just an hour and a half, they'll be in Poland, and from there, hoping to start fresh in Canada. The shelling and bombardment here in Ukraine is intensifying. And after speaking with the Russian president, France's president, Emmanuel Macron, warned that Putin will not stop his attacks on Ukraine. Susan Ormiston, CBC News, Lviv.
So with no sign that Russia's president is planning to stop this, the need to escape for many in Ukraine is growing, with cities, infrastructure, civilians all in peril.
And Adrienne, the zone of relative peace in the country is shrinking. Russia's making slow progress in its invasion in the north and south of Ukraine, but soldiers on both sides and Ukrainian civilians are paying a terrible cost, some of which you're about to see. It is hard to watch, and in stark contrast to the official message from the Kremlin. In a televised address, the Russian president said the operation was going well and that his forces are striving to avoid civilian casualties, but none of that is clear from the ground. A drive through the streets of Chernihiv, where homes and schools are taking heavy damage. Officials say 33 bodies were pulled from the rubble before shelling forced rescuers away. In Ukraine's north, Chernihiv is a key target for Russian forces pushing towards Kyiv from the east. The goal, to force the city to split its defenses. Russia is also trying to expand around the capital's northwestern suburbs, where they've failed to advance. Take a look at Borodyanka. This is the aftermath of a ferocious battle that has ripped the town apart, the apparent remains of a Russian convoy surrounded by destruction. The trouble for Ukraine gets worse in the south. Russian forces from Crimea and the Donbass have linked together, with fears Mariupol is on the verge of falling and that Odessa could be next.
Одеса. Вони хочуть зруйнувати нашу Одесу, але побачать лише дно Чорного моря, бо вони дно.
Уважаемые товарищи, хочу сказать, что специальная военная операция идет в строгом соответствии с графиком. По плану.
According to plan is the message now from Vladimir Putin. But growing amounts of unverified video showing Russian losses, including equipment abandoned or destroyed, gives a different impression. So the danger and devastation is widespread, Adrienne, but so is the resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. There is the official type, the soldiers and the reservists picking up the weapons and using them. But behind them is a whole other line of defense. It is scattered in communities all over Ukraine, like that one right there. Margaret Evans shows us how people there are working to support those on the front lines in any way they can.
There are many ways to fight a war. And along the frozen backroads of southwest Ukraine, you'll find them in places like this, a town called Kopachinsi. The mayor is meeting his crisis team, his wife included. The talk not of potholes or zoning permits, but how to help the war effort.
I'm not a fighter, I'm not a warrior, I'm not a professional soldier, but now I need to be one.
They gather supplies for the town's reservists, already bussed to front lines. Requests coming for medicine, uniforms, even body armor.
This is a quiet town, about 13,000 people and far from the fighting, but not in people's hearts and minds.
At the kindergarten, this is the sound that's replaced children's voices. Townspeople making camouflage sheets to send to military positions. Childhood innocence and the worries of war mingling. In the kitchens that once served children's lunches, women work in shifts to make food for volunteer fighters and men guarding checkpoints. And the teachers like Svetlana Sahaidik put on a brave face. I believe our children have a future, she says. We do our best to win, and I hope everything will be okay. Canadian Maria Tusick met her future husband, the mayor, when they were kids here.
These past 6-7 days have really felt like it's been 6-7 months.
She says the activity helps people calm their fears.
We're all out there. We know that it's in our hands to do something about this. It's in our hands to win this war.
There are scenes like this all across Ukraine. Ordinary people digging in and getting ready. And if deft fingers could summon magic, then protective charms are surely being woven into the knots they tie for their loved ones and their country. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Kopachinci, Ukraine.
Here in Poland, we're seeing exhaustion, enormous stress, loss, but it's largely being received with kindness and an overwhelming desire to help. And it doesn't take long to realize this is a crossroads, not just for people getting away from the conflict, but for others heading towards it. Sometimes it's 60-hour waits, today just 3 or 4. Getting people across this border from Ukraine to Poland is getting faster, and Europe is getting organized. Today, a temporary but unprecedented move. Anyone arriving from Ukraine can soon go to any EU country. That means kids can go to school, adults can get work. That will help eventually. But eventually is far away when you're not sure where you're sleeping tonight.
From Bydgoszcz into Berlin.
Sometimes there's a fix for that. Photographer Michael Luther Davies physically mapping out a route for a woman who says only that her name is Olga. He met her family in Ukraine, helped her walk out.
And I met the family here, and they had to leave their husband there.
They want to go on to Belgium. He'll help with that too.
All people want to help you. All you don't need to pay for anything of this. You can take if you need it, and I very appreciate these people.
The donations are overwhelming, plentiful enough that the littlest can have their pick of the tiniest of toys. Important when all you have is all you can carry. But fleeing is brutal work, and all they really want is home. The flow of people from Ukraine into Poland comes in waves. It happens all night and all day, but compounding the heartbreak here is that the traffic is not one way. If you look past all these people, there's a footpath on it, many who are heading back in. All these supplies heading back into Ukraine. The vehicles and people too. 80,000 people have gone back into the country. 1 million have fled. Is that a hard decision to go back? There's no decision, he says. It has to be like this. No vehicles, people here all but marching back inside. For the love of family, as with this woman who's come from Portugal, or to go fight in spite of the love of family. This man is leaving his behind in Poland. Your family here doesn't know you're going?
He sent them the video from here that he's here.
Coming in or going back, all of it a sacrifice. Many Ukrainians continue to head further west to places like Germany, where what began as a trickle has now become a flood.
Please clear from the platform and the area of the stairs. Please leave the platform by stairs.
On the right side, there's like thousands of people from Berlin offering place to stay. This is absolutely incredible.
I was very scared, and I had to get out from this hell.
So thousands of Ukrainian refugees right there pouring into Berlin after Germany's national railway offered them free travel from Poland. After fleeing the violence, they are now being met by an army of volunteers and average residents who have shown up to offer food, toys for the kids, and crucially, places to stay. So, Ian, another sign of the humanitarian need and then the generosity Ukrainians are receiving across the continent tonight.
And Adrienne, support for Ukraine is coming from Canada as well, including from those who want to fight. Some retired Canadian Armed Forces members are volunteering to defend Ukraine. They're answering the Ukrainian president's call for foreign fighters to join the resistance. As Ashley Burke tells us, the risks they face go beyond combat.
That's a periscope. You see?
The retired Canadian soldier who goes by Wally showing his gear. A former sniper now in Ukraine to join the fight.
I want to help them because they want to be free, basically. It's as simple as that.
He served in Afghanistan and Iraq, then as a foreign fighter against ISIS in Syria. Now Wally's left his IT job to take up arms against Russia.
Basically, they just send us list of weapons, the Ukrainian weapons. They have like anti-tank weapons. They have a sniper rifle, assault rifle, grenades, and rockets.
He asked us to keep his real name confidential over concerns for his safety. He crossed the border into Ukraine from Poland, joining up with a group of fellow Canadians and British veterans, all with military backgrounds. He says they were greeted with hugs, handshakes, and flags by Ukrainians.
I had to help because there are people here that are being bombarded just because they want to be European, basically, and not Russian.
So he joined a brigade led by another Canadian, a former military reservist who asked not to be identified over concerns for his wife and 3-year-old who live in Ukraine.
I was on the phone with my wife, and you could hear like the 152 millimeters just hitting around the building.
The risks are obvious, being killed, injured, or captured, but as mercenaries, there could be more.
They would be at risk of not receiving the protections under international humanitarian law.
Wally says he knows all this. His wife begged him not to go.
My son, his first birthday is in a week. Yes. So I feel like it's hard, okay? That's the hardest part, actually.
The Prime Minister says those who want to support Ukraine can make a personal choice about how, but the government has been warning Canadians for weeks to avoid traveling to Ukraine and to leave if they can. Experts say that it's not against the law to join the resistance of an ally. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
And Canada is extending more help to Ukraine, promising to accept an unlimited number of applications from people fleeing the conflict. As Catherine Cullen tells us, it was part of a series of announcements today that also included more sanctions against Russia.
I get calls at 12 a.m., 1 a.m., anytime. People are crying over the phone.
As an immigration consultant, Katerina Kogel is dealing with clients on edge, Ukrainians desperate to come to Canada. The office phones don't stop, but this is very personal too. She's talking to her own mother, also trying to escape Ukraine after 6 days in a bomb shelter.
She's really scared, you know. It's just, you don't know what to expect the next minute.
Her mother has the advantage of being a new Canadian citizen, but so many who have only called Ukraine home are also trying to flee. Now Canada's government is doing more to bring them here.
There is no limit to the number of applications that we are going to be willing to accept.
It will take an application and biometric screening in order to stay in Canada for up to 2 years.
You'll be able to work and study as part of this program after you arrive.
They're also trying to make it easier for Canadians to sponsor more family members from Ukraine to stay here. Then there is the latest daily dose of measures to strike back at Russia.
We intend to supply additional lethal aid to Ukraine.
Up to 4,500 of these rocket launchers and 7,500 hand grenades. More financial pain.
A tariff of 35% on their exports to Canada.
And trying to make Russia that much more of a pariah, this time from international policing.
Canada and other close partners are calling to suspend Russia from Interpol.
It's expected to take about 2 weeks to get the new streamlined visa process for Ukrainians up and running. Some have suggested that the government should just skip the application and fingerprinting process and simply let Ukrainians in. The government, though, says that some security measures are still needed. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
Punishing measures from the West have thrown Russia into economic turmoil.
Russian future, of course, I hope I put all my wishes that we find the solution.
Up next, how sanctions are already hitting the country hard. Plus, the Prime Minister has taken a strong stance in support of Ukraine, but is it enough? And will it make any difference? Rosemary and the At Issue panel take on the political stakes here in Canada.
And I'll be back from near the border with Ukraine and a humanitarian crisis that is growing by the day.
It's
It's terrible what is happening. We are living in real hell.
A little later, the threat of disease and the struggle to treat patients as the war rages on. We are back in 2. An update now on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine. It's Europe's largest. It has been shelled by Russia, and that led to a fire. So you could see signs of shelling earlier tonight from this camera. The fire reportedly not in a building with an active reactor. The director of the plant told Ukrainian media that the radiation risk has been secured. The Paralympics will open in Beijing tomorrow morning, but athletes from Russia and Belarus won't be allowed to compete.
The war has now come to these games, and behind the scenes, many governments are having an influence on our cherished event.
The International Paralympic Committee reversed its earlier ruling that they could compete without national flags or symbols, but after widespread criticism, 83 athletes will now be sent home. As the violence intensifies in Ukraine, so too does the economic pain for everyday Russians. Western sanctions are hitting Russia's economy very hard, with the ruble devalued and foreign companies pulling out. Briar Stewart shows us how bad things are getting.
Inside this box, the very last shipment of iPhones to arrive at this electronics store. Apple is pulling its products out of Russia, so this manager doesn't know what will happen to his business.
This is all you do, right? All you sell is Apple products here, right?
The products that were on the shelves sold out quickly and at a premium.
All iPhone and all iPad, iMac, MacBook, 2 days.
IKEA is temporarily pausing operations in Russia and in Belarus, impacting 15,000 employees and scores of customers. While some big Western brands say they no longer want to sell their products to Russia, small stores that cater to the tourist trade fear there will be fewer visitors wanting Russian souvenirs in the months ahead.
Russian future, of course, I hope I put all my wishes that we find the solution.
But right now, the economy is in turmoil. Russia's sovereign debt was downgraded to junk status. On this Russian business channel, this economist drank to the death of Russia's stock market, much to the horror of the host. The country's stock exchange was closed for a 4th straight day as sanctions are wreaking havoc on the ruble and the economy. The country's foreign minister said the sanctions can be seen as a tax on Russia's independence. And there are many that would agree, including this couple who told us to stop interfering in their country when we asked if they were having problems banking. You are talking to patriots right now, she said, not to those who sell out. Well, they insist there's nothing wrong with Russia's banking system. The lines at some ATMs tell a different story. People desperate to withdraw cash, fearing the money might not be there the next time they need it. Briar Stewart, CBC News, St. Petersburg.
This war has big political stakes for Canada as well, and Rosie is here with the At Issue panel. Hi, Rosie.
Thanks, Adrienne. As things intensify on the ground in Ukraine, politicians in this country grapple with how to deal with Russia. So is Canada doing enough, and what more can be done? Chantal, Althea, Andrew, and Elamine will be with all of us right after this.
The thing with sanctions and penalties in an interconnected world is they end up hurting everyone. We cannot hold back on putting everything forward to hold Vladimir Putin to account, to make sure that he understands that this was a terrible mistake for which he and the Russian people will pay.
The Prime Minister earlier today with some strong words against Russia's leader. Is Canada doing enough? Is it working? It's Thursday. I'm here with That Issue. Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Elamine Abdulmahmoud. Obviously, Canada is not working in a vacuum here. It is coordinating with its allies to put these different sanctions in place. But Chantal, how do you think the Trudeau government is managing this crisis?
A lot better than the occupation of downtown Ottawa, and it's a much bigger problem. But let's be clear, Canada here is not in the lead. It is doing everything that it has to do to be in sync with its allies, but it needs to take its cues from Europe for one and the US for two.
And Andrew, are there things that we could, as a sort of middle power, soft power, be doing that we are not doing, or is there a leadership role that we could be providing that you don't see us doing?
I don't see us playing a leadership role in this fight. I'd prefer if we weren't slightly behind the curve. It's a minor complaint. We have brought in the things we should have been bringing in terms of financial sanctions, in terms of going after the oligarchs, in terms of closing our airspace, and in terms of providing weapons. But we always seem to be slightly slower than one might prefer. I'm not sure why. But as I say, in the grand scheme of things, it's a minor complaint. One wishes we were in a position to provide substantially more in the way of lethal weapons to Ukraine, but it's a mark of how much our military has been degraded that we're probably doing about as much as we can now.
Althea, what do you make of how the government is managing it, and whether it is sort of the extent of what we are capable of?
Well, I think the interesting thing in this is that bar of like what the government is prepared to do keeps shifting, and that's a good thing. I mean, I think to everybody else's point, we are working hand in hand, and it's great to see the type of cooperation that we've seen with the United States and with our European allies, and with, I'm still blown away by Switzerland, no longer being neutral, and Germany increasing its defense spending. I mean, the changes that have happened over the past 2 weeks are monumental, but is it working? Is it working? Has the war stopped? Clearly not. Are Western powers willing to take that further step? So far, no. Mélanie Joly was on an ed board with the Toronto Star and said that our foreign affairs minister, said that Joe Biden has made it very clear that that's his red line. He's not willing to shoot down Russian jets. And, so far, nobody else is willing to do that. NATO has been very clear, but could it be that eventually that line also shifts? If, I don't remember seeing a war like this. Like every morning I wake up to Twitter and there are social media videos about what's happening on the ground, the way people are dying. If we see things that we are not able to tolerate, will we be willing to support our governments in going that extra line? Possibly.
Elamine, your thoughts, just initial thoughts on how the government's doing.
I mean, I have to say, like, the way that we've been watching that footage and this information coming out of Ukraine has been quite inspiring for a lot of people, and I think it's pushed a lot of governments to act in a way that they would have not otherwise have acted. I don't think anyone anticipated that Western governments would ban the way that they did in such a short period of time. But I do have to give the government credit. For example, multiple places, including Reuters and Politico, reported that Christopher Freeland was pretty instrumental in leading the process to get the SWIFT payments to stop in Russia. Like, that is a significant step, and I don't think you get that step if you hadn't spent quite a bit of time building your credibility on the world stage. I think that is a reflection of maybe the place that we occupy. That is the kind of power that we have, and it's good to see that we are using it. Like Andrew said, minor complaints, like the idea that we haven't yet opened our borders for visa-free travel for Ukrainians, but one presumes that is actually coming. Like, we seem to be moving in that direction because, as Althea said, the things that we're willing to do keep changing, and that is a good thing.
Okay, so what about the broader issue that the government and all allies seem concerned about here? Sort of rules-based order in the world. I am not sure what happens at this point. Chantal, I know that's a big question, but.
Are you asking me what happens at this point? Because if you are, you're asking the wrong person.
No, I'm asking you, how do we go back to, or do we go back to a place where rules-based order is what sort of guides us in the world?
Actually, I think that the past week and a half has strengthened the rule-based order in the world. The notion that the EU couldn't stand together, that NATO was placed an empty shell, it was called, I think, by President Macron. So on that basis, and the fact that governments are actually backed by public opinion. Mm-hmm. But I think there is a limit to governments being backed by public opinion rather than offering guidance on this. And there's a line there. I'm not sure it's the red line that Joe Biden has, but there is a line where you need to be leading and not reacting to public opinion pushes. That being said, because I'm one of the older members on this panel, I'll remind you that when we last saw pictures or first saw pictures of a conflict, it would have been the Vietnam War, and the reaction was to go for peace. Right. The opposite is happening this time, and that's different.
Yeah, I mean, the first war I remember seeing on TV was the Iraq War, that we were seeing things in real time. This is a different kind of experience because of what you've all said about social media. Andrew, on the broader question about sort of international order being upended, is it, to Chantal's point, actually being strengthened through this in some way?
In some way. So certainly the reaction since the invasion of Ukraine has been heartening, but it's very late in the day. Vladimir Putin has presented a challenge to the rules-based order for many, many years, and his previous incursions upon it, his previous outrages, including in Ukraine in 2014, including in Georgia in 2008, were met with much less fortitude and much less strength and resolve, which is the reason why we're here today. And we are in a very, very serious challenge here. So yes, the world has moved together on this in encouraging ways in terms of sanctions, et cetera. But the challenge presented by Putin is existential. It's obviously existential for Ukraine, but when you see the facility with which he wields the nuclear threat, it is clear that we're not dealing with somebody here who is amenable to a rules-based order. And while we have decided that we're going to draw the line at we will provide weapons to Ukraine, but we will not provide air cover. Well, those are challenging questions. We think what we're doing there is we're avoiding acts of war, but these are very fluid definitions. You can look at our providing weapons to Ukraine as being helping Ukraine to attack the Russians, or you can look at it as NATO attacking the Russians using Ukraine personnel. And I guarantee you some people in Russia are looking at it that way. So we're always we're always doing something where we might be tripping the wire, where we might be going too far. And we're all kind of feeling our way along as we do this. We want to help Ukraine as much as we can. We don't want to set off a nuclear war. But it's going to be really challenged when we see the casualties start to mount in Ukraine, and when the demands that we do something mount. It's very unclear where that line has to be drawn.
Yeah, and I guess to Chantal's point, Althea, how the public responds to those things is also part of, not the central calculation, but it's part of how leaders in different countries have to think about it too.
Of course, and that line keeps shifting, I think, for people like the population, the citizenry, as well as governments. But I think what's really clear from, what Chantal and Andrew are saying is that we're not going to succeed unless we all do this together. And in some ways that's heartening, but it's also a little discouraging. I think a lot of questions will be asked later, maybe even starting, frankly, about what our own military capabilities are and how ill-equipped we are to defend our own borders, especially our north. So it is interesting that we are seeing our democratic institutions that have gone through a lot of questioning, and we've basically since Donald Trump's election, I think we've all wondered if our institutions can survive. And there was a lot of time during COVID where we thought maybe things were looking really gloomy, and actually this has united us, not just Western allies, but even just the House of Commons this week. I mean, the tone in question period is so drastically different. The questions are really about policy. It is really quite heartening to see opposition parties and the government working together, the Prime Minister responding, saying, like, we're open to all of your suggestions. It's, there are the slivers of sunlight amidst these dark clouds.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a contrast to the way Parliament was working at the height of the crisis of the convoy, which was, only a week or so ago. Elaine, your thoughts on everything?
I mean, I have to say that one of the positives of our world order responding to Russia has been that we've pulled out all the stops when it comes to legal, economic sanctions, everything that can be applied. But the negative is that we appear to have actually reached that threshold pretty quickly. And just a matter of what do we do next when we have no more tools left in our arsenal? I think there are tools being applied in terms of trying to convince Russians in Russia to sort of protest against this, but that can only be pushed so far. are. So it's a matter of whether we kind of look around and say there is nothing else we can do except for escalate it to the place where nobody wants to escalate it to. So I'm worried that we're running out of options quickly.
Well, as I say, we take refuge in that. We say establishing a no-fly zone would be too far. That would escalate. But Putin could turn the tables on it. Putin could say, you know what, the fact that you're providing this weaponry, that's too much. I'm now threatening over that. Yeah. And what will we do then? Yeah. So at some point, we're always going to be running up against this question of what threats will we accept and what threats won't we? And I'm not, as I said, I'm not sure we should be too self-congratulatory when what we're staring right now in the face is likely mass slaughter in Ukraine.
Last word to you, Chantal.
But that just goes to show that it is political leadership rather than whatever people feel that we should be doing that should guide Canadians, but also the rest of the world. And I'm not completely sure that it makes sense to believe that people will follow governments onto something that is more drastic. Okay. So it's very slippery ground here. Yeah. I also believe self-congratulations are not in order.
Okay, we'll leave it there, everybody. Another heavy topic for us this week, but thank you. And with that, I'll send things back now to Adrienne in Poland.
All right, thank you, Rosie. Not only is Ukraine under siege from Russia, this war is playing out in the middle of a pandemic. Coming up, the growing challenges facing frontline medical workers. The fighting in Ukraine is not just taking lives, it is threatening the country's ability to save lives. Hospitals have been hit. Some are now barely operational. That's forcing doctors, nurses, and patients underground. So it is pretty hard to imagine even keeping the system going, let alone performing surgeries or delivering babies. And yet, Ukrainian healthcare workers soldier on. Here's Vicadopia on their desperate situation.
New life doesn't stop for war. In a hospital basement in Chernihiv, just 2 hours from Ukraine's border with Russia, more than 40 babies have been born down here since last week, when the entire maternity ward was forced underground by shelling. In Ukraine's capital, another basement maternity ward.
Of course, it's terrible what is happening. We're living in real hell.
Many of Ukraine's hospitals are no longer safe, and among patients struggling, new mothers.
And they were all in blood because they'd had, for example, C-section. And then again, the alarm started and they need to go down. So basically, they didn't even have time to lie after the C-section.
As basic hospital supplies begin to run out, 36 tons of critical aid arrives in Poland.
We have surgical supplies to treat the wound, as well as medicine for all other diseases that do not stop for work.
But the aid is destined for nearby western Ukraine, far from the devastation to the east and south.
As neurosurgeons, obviously.
This doctor trains physicians in Ukraine for elective surgeries. They're now treating war trauma.
Bullet holes, shrapnel wounds that involve significant, degloving of the scalp.
Another dimension to the crisis, the threat of infectious diseases spreading in crowded conditions. Only a third of Ukraine's population is double vaccinated against COVID-19. The country also has one of the highest rates of tuberculosis in Europe.
Many of these are medical conditions that if access is interrupted, they could very quickly lead to severe morbidity, serious complications, and in worst case, death.
And as that threat looms, Ukraine's healthcare system and its people manage to carry on for now. Vicadopia, CBC News, Toronto.
And that question of how long Ukrainians can hold on, it just hangs over everything and everyone in this part of the world right now, Ian, as we turn things back over to you in Vancouver.
All right, Adrienne, thank you. Gas prices are surging across Canada.
We used to burn $60 a day, now we're doing $120.
Coming up, why experts say it's a trend that is likely to continue. Welcome back. We're keeping a close eye on the situation in Ukraine, but we're also tracking some other stories today. An Alabama man is the first person to be convicted of seditious conspiracy in connection with the attacks on the U.S. Capitol building in January of 2021. Prosecutors say 34-year-old Joshua James is a member of a far-right militia, which prosecutors say plotted to disrupt the transfer of presidential power. Donald Trump may also face charges, according to the congressional committee investigating the attack.
You would not have a problem fundraising for the Ku Klux Klan, is what you're saying.
If they pass all of those measures and what they're fundraising for is legal, then yes, we will allow them to fundraise.
Ask his questions.
A heated debate at a parliamentary committee in Ottawa today, featuring the founders of the fundraising site Give, Send, Go. Testifying as well today, representatives from GoFundMe. At issue, the handling of the fundraising campaigns for the recent truckers' convoy. The money raised remains in limbo, pending a class action lawsuit. Did you see the price of gas today? It's been hitting records in many parts of the country. Lindsay Duncombe shows us the peaks and the reason why it could keep climbing.
Across the country, the numbers just keep going up. Gas costs more than $1.50 a liter in Calgary, higher still in Windsor and Vancouver. Brace yourself, edging ever closer to $2 a liter.
My commute is an hour every day, so you can imagine how much gas my car chugs in.
You know, the more at the pump, less in the pocket.
It's worse on Vancouver Island, where politicians say it's not their fault.
But an 18-cent a liter increase overnight has everything to do with international instability and, of course, the events unfolding in Ukraine.
Russia produces about 10% of the world's crude oil. Sanctions mean many countries aren't buying. OPEC has increased its manufacturing a little, not a lot. Bottom line, less oil all over the world.
This shortage in supply is what is reflected in the high prices.
Way too high. In Canada, the east and west coasts are getting the worst of it. Newfoundland and Labrador, too, is facing prices close to $2 a liter.
We used to burn $60 a day, now we're doing $120.
It's about to get worse. Multiple gas stations told CBC News they expect the Public Utilities Board, which regulates prices in the province, to bump up the cost by 15 cents a liter tomorrow. People are driving less.
We definitely have changed our driving habits. We don't go across the island.
It's likely that as sanctions tighten, prices will continue to rise. No one really knows for how long. So, from coast to coast to coast and in between, Canadians adapt.
You'll see a lot more people walking and riding bikes, I can tell you that, coming this summer, I'm sure.
Lindsay Duncombe, CBC News, Vancouver.
Coming up, the creative ways some people are choosing to help support residents of Ukraine.
I immediately opened Airbnb and went and found an apartment and booked the next 2 nights.
That's next in our moment. People from all over the world, including here in Canada, are booking Airbnbs in Ukraine, but they're not actually planning to stay there. They're doing it as a way to help support residents of Ukraine, and that is our moment.
I found out about booking an Airbnb in Kiev through Instagram. I went on Airbnb. I searched for some places in Ukraine. I looked for somebody who was a local host and not just a company. Wanted to make sure that they lived there, and I found dates that were available that were soon to come up so that they could get paid right away, and booked them. It was really easy, and they replied with very heartfelt message. Obviously made a big difference to them, and just really gave me that chance to connect one-on-one with them and send their love from Canada.
I found out about this idea just from a friend on Facebook, honestly. She posted something about it. And so I immediately opened Airbnb and went and found an apartment and booked the next 2 nights. You don't need to look like somebody or speak the same language or live in the same place to have empathy for another person. This is a human-to-human interaction, and that's fantastic.
It has been interesting to see the impact of the online world and what so far has been pretty robust internet connections in Ukraine, the impact it's had on this invasion, not just getting information out and sometimes misinformation, but also here with this elegant fundraising idea, looking at people looking at the web. People are looking for other ways too, like going to Etsy, the craft site, and trying to buy crafts to give some money to people in Ukraine. That is The National for March the 3rd. Good night.